You have been here before. Not this apartment, maybe, not this specific argument spilling into a hallway at 2 in the morning, but this feeling, this particular voltage. You know what comes next. You have watched this movie enough times to recite the ending, and still you stayed in the seat. Here is the part nobody says out loud. You told yourself it was over. You said the words with full conviction. You cried through it. You processed it with your friends over several bottles of wine, and at least one of them said something along the lines of, "You deserve better," and you agreed. You genuinely agreed. You wanted peace. You wanted someone who texted back inside of a reasonable window and remembered the things you told them and didn't make you feel like your nervous system was a live wire every single day. And then someone walked in. Maybe it was the way they held eye contact a second longer than comfortable. Maybe it was the edge underneath their voice, the sense that something in them was unresolved, enormous, barely contained. And something in you, not the part that manages the calendar and the reputation and sincerely believes it is the one driving, something else woke up, leaned forward, said, "There you are." That is not chemistry. Or it is chemistry, but chemistry is not neutral. Chemistry is not evidence. Chemistry is a signal, and the question nobody thinks to ask in that moment is, what exactly is this signal matching? Because the pull toward a person is not random. It lands where it lands for a reason, and sometimes that reason is not desire. Sometimes it is recognition. Recognition of something old, something familiar, not because it is good, but because it is legible, because it rhymes with an earlier time when chaos was the weather, and you learned to call that weather home. There is a part of you that never learned to read clocks or calendars, a layer that still operates on the original circuitry, running the same calculations it ran when you were small, and the people around you were your whole world. That part does not know the relationship ended. It does not know you drove away. Picture someone sitting in their car outside a partner's house. The engine is running. They know, with the clear, exhausted certainty of someone who has arrived at this exact coordinates before, that they should leave. Not tomorrow, tonight, for good. Their hands are on the wheel. They're still sitting there. That pause is not weakness. It is not stupidity. It is something far older than either of those words. And it has a shape. It has a name. The name is this. You are not falling for another person. You are falling for a figure inside yourself, one you have been carrying so long you have forgotten it belongs to you. Every person holds inside them a hidden inner opposite, the dark counterpart you carry inside, shaped in the image of everyone who failed to love you well. Not failed in small ways, failed in the formative ways. The parent who was cold when you needed warmth, the caregiver who was unpredictable enough that you spent your childhood learning to read the atmosphere of a room like a barometer. That figure, that compressed inheritance of longing and disappointment, does not stay quietly filed away. It moves. It looks for a face. And here is what makes it dangerous. The inner opposite is not neutral. It has a light aspect and a dark one. And the dark one has a mythology. You have seen her before. The woman who lures men to the rocks, whose voice is sweeter than it has any right to be, who promises arrival and delivers obliteration. The Lorelei, the femme fatale, the siren. These are not mere metaphors for difficult women. They are descriptions of what the hidden inner counterpart becomes when it has never been met consciously, when it has been left to ripen in the dark into something that promises transformation and delivers exactly the kind of suffering that feels, at least in the early stages, like aliveness. The same shape exists in reverse, the unreachable man. Cold, brilliant, already spoken for in some unnamed way, a Heathcliff made of weather and wounded pride, the one who will never quite let you in, who recedes exactly as fast as you approach, who seems to stand at the entrance to something enormous. He is not a man. He is the image of the father you couldn't reach. He is the shape of a door you learned early was not meant to open for you, and that training left a groove, and now every man who replicates that inaccessibility fits into the groove like a key. This is what projection means. It is the moment your inner image gets cast onto a real face, like throwing a slide onto a screen and being startled when the screen seems to glow. The person standing in front of you is real. Their laugh is real. Their smell, their history. But the radiance you see around them, that particular voltage you cannot explain to your skeptical friends, that is yours. You brought it with you. You have been carrying the slide for years, and they simply happen to walk into the light at the right angle. There is a story from Siberia. A hunter is crossing a field when he hears singing, a woman's voice rising from somewhere across a frozen river. It is the most beautiful sound he has ever encountered. He tears off his coat, he wades in, the water is ice. He does not stop. He swims toward the voice with everything he has, the cold dragging at his limbs, because whatever is on the other side of that sound is worth every cost. He reaches the far bank. He finds an owl. He drowns, reaching for something that was never there. Only his own longing made visible, given a voice, projected onto the cold air of a winter night. The owl did not deceive him. The owl was simply an owl. The deception was always interior. This is not a story about stupidity. It is a story about what happens when the soul image, the invisible mold inside you, pressed by old love and old hurt, that your longing keeps pouring itself into, has never been recognized for what it is. When it has been mistaken for a destination rather than a map to something internal. The hunter drowned because he believed the singing was outside him. And underneath all of this runs something older and more insistent than any single attachment. A wound that has learned to argue. A cluster of old feelings so charged it acts with its own timing and its own agenda, hijacking your responses before your better judgment can intervene. You think you are making a choice. You think you are simply drawn to a particular kind of person. But the draw has circuitry, and the circuitry was installed before you were old enough to consent to the installation. The face that stops you in a room is not random. The chest-tightening recognition, there you are, is not mystical. It is mechanical. It is the soul image meeting its approximate match in the wild. And here is what that means for you. The more you deny what you actually want, the more insistently the inner figure goes looking for it, and the form it finds will not be gentle. There was a monk who withdrew from everything. He built his cell at the edge of the world, and filled his days with silence and discipline and the long labor of turning away. He had decided, with genuine conviction, that the pull toward the world, toward wine, toward company, toward the flush and press of bodies in a room, was the enemy of the life he wanted. So he refused it. He starved it. He believed, as many people believe, that if you simply do not feed a thing, it eventually dies. Then one day he walked into Alexandria. He had reasons. A journey, an errand, something administrative and brief. He was not going to stay. He was not going to participate. He was going to pass through the city the way a doctor moves through a ward, proximate but untouched. And for a while he walked the streets with that composure. And then the crowds thickened. And then there was music. And then someone handed him a cup. And by the time the cup was empty, something inside him had thrown open every door he had spent years nailing shut. He was not walking through Alexandria anymore. Alexandria was walking through him. He fell into the wine, into the company, into every pleasure he had told himself he was finished with, not despite the years of refusal, but because of them. The suppression had not diminished the pull. It had pressurized it. This is what happens to passion when you forbid it. It does not disappear. It goes underground, and underground things do not diminish, they concentrate. They become Kali with her necklace of skulls, the devouring fire, the desire that has waited long enough to stop being selective. Every mystic tradition that has mapped the inner life carefully has noticed the same phenomenon. The emotion you bury does not stay buried. It ferments. It metastasizes. It returns wearing a face you don't recognize, with an urgency that bypasses every reasonable objection you have assembled in its absence. And the part of you that has been so good for so long has nothing left to resist it with, because all its energy went to the resistance itself. This is the inner world shifting into reverse, pulling vital energy back toward old unresolved territory the way a river floods when its forward channel is blocked. When the future feels inert, when the civilized forward path has gone quiet and nothing in the expected direction has any charge, the drive that animates you, the current of vitality that moves toward whatever has charge, does not simply wait. It reverses. It loads the old patterns with new urgency. It goes back to where it last felt alive, and in a person who has been running on discipline and self-improvement and sensible choices, where it last felt alive is often precisely the territory they have been most assiduously avoiding. The pull toward chaos is not a malfunction. It is not stupidity or weakness or a character defect. It is the drive carrying something real. Genuine aliveness, genuine fire, the connecting force in its most undomesticated form. Flame gives light because it consumes. You cannot have the warmth without the burning. The figure who carries that specific charge, part terror, part magnetism. That specific quality that seizes you when something touches the live wire of something ancient in you. The quality you didn't choose because it chose you. That figure is not only dangerous, that figure carries vitality. There is a principle in the oldest layers of symbolic thinking that recognized this paradox before it had clinical language for it. The god called Abraxas, the figure that stands above all opposites, is simultaneously life and death, summer and winter, a single image holding the whole contradiction without resolving it. The serpent that the ancients associated with sexuality and the earthy soul was never purely evil in the old systems. It was ambivalent. It was power moving toward manifestation, and whether that manifestation healed or destroyed depended entirely on the relationship you had with it, not on the power itself. The depths are not clean. They were never meant to be clean. The slime at the bottom of a still lake contains, along with everything decomposing, the seed material of whatever comes next. If we do not have access to the depths, if we seal them off, if we build a perfectly sanitized life above the waterline and pretend the depths are not there, we do not thereby become safe. We become brittle. We become the monk in Alexandria, decades of composure dissolving in a single evening, because the archaic layer beneath the civilized self still operates on primal logic, and it had simply been waiting. When a force inside you takes the wheel so completely that you are no longer choosing, when you are being driven by something old enough to predate your name, the question is not how to eliminate it. The question is whether you have ever built anything capable of holding it. That is a different kind of problem, and it requires a different kind of work. The work, then, is not elimination. It is construction. Think about someone who has spent their adult life drawn to partners who carry a particular charge, the ones who are slightly out of reach, slightly unpredictable, who blow into their life like weather. They don't choose these people in any deliberate sense. The pull is already operating before the choosing begins. And every time, the same arc, an almost unbearable aliveness at the start, and then the slow catastrophe. They call it bad luck. They call it a pattern. What they have not yet done is look at the pull itself, not the person it lands on, but the pull, and ask what it is actually about, because the person on the other end of that pull is carrying something. Some quality that belongs in full to the inner life. The part operating below the choices, below the name, below the careful self they've assembled over decades. The dangerous partner is not actually the source of that aliveness. They are the screen onto which the inner figure has been projected. And the moment you recognize that, truly recognize it, not as a concept but as a lived fact, the whole equation changes. That recognition is the first move. Not suppression, not analysis, not a firm decision to do better next time, just the pause. The moment of noticing, something in me has activated. And it has done this before, and it is asking for something. What is it asking for? This is where the old alchemists were pointing with their image of the vessel. The alchemists were not literally trying to turn lead into gold. They were describing a process they had observed in themselves. That raw, volatile material, the kind that could burn the whole laboratory down if handled carelessly, could be transformed, but only inside a container strong enough to hold it. The fire was not the enemy. The fire was the whole point. Without it, nothing changed. The problem was never the fire. The problem was the absence of a container. Passion without a container is just destruction waiting for an occasion. You've seen this. A person who runs headlong into every obsession, every infatuation, every compulsion, not because they are weak, but because they have never built anything capable of receiving that level of intensity. The energy moves through them and leaves wreckage. And what they were actually seeking, the aliveness, the sense of being fully present in their own life, the feeling that something real is happening. That was legitimate. That was what the chaos was offering. It is possible to separate the vitality from the chaos itself. That is precisely what containment allows. But containment is not the same as control. This is the part that gets misunderstood. Building a container does not mean dimming the fire. It means respecting the power enough to hold it consciously rather than letting it operate unconsciously, which is the only other option. The inner figure, the hidden counterpart that carries everything your conscious self has not claimed, is not manageable. It is not tameable. What is possible is a relationship with it. The moods that arrive without explanation, the fantasies that pull harder than you'd like, the irrational certainties. These are not noise. They are the inner figure speaking. They are data about the depths. Not instructions to follow blindly, but signals worth reading. And then there is the part of the inner world that refuses, at every turn, to be civilized. The disruptor who tears down every tidy arrangement you've made, who seems to take genuine pleasure in the collapse of whatever you've carefully constructed, and who becomes genuinely dangerous the moment you stop acknowledging it exists. When someone tells you they have finally definitively gotten their life in order, that they no longer feel any pull toward the old chaos, pay attention to what happens next. The disruptive force does not disappear because it has been refused an audience. It finds a side door. The person who has always been drawn to dangerous partners, who has learned to pause and ask what the pull is offering, they are not free of the pull. They are in relationship with it. That is different. And from inside that relationship, something that was only ever destruction begins, slowly, to carry the first faint suggestion of something else. Fire is the oldest metaphor for this. There is a reason it keeps returning. The fire does not go away. That is not a failure of the work. That is how the work is supposed to end, not with the fire extinguished, but with something in you that has learned to stand close enough to feel it without being consumed. The difference is not safety. It is a kind of knowing. It is the difference between someone who has never touched a flame and someone who has deliberately held their hand near enough to understand what heat is. The hidden inner opposite, that figure who inhabits the far end of who you believe yourself to be, is not waiting to destroy you. It has been trying, in the only language it knows, to return something you set down long ago. The pull toward someone dangerous, someone who makes you feel unsteady, someone who seems to hold a quality you cannot name but cannot stop reaching for. That pull is a carrier. It carries something that belongs to you. And the question is not how to stop the pull. The question is what you are reaching for inside it. Not why do I keep choosing people who hurt me? That question keeps you in the role of victim, keeps the mystery outside yourself, keeps the fire something that happens to you rather than something you are in relationship with. The better question is quieter and harder. What am I looking for in the flame? Because the connecting force, the thing that draws people toward one another across every kind of distance and difference and plain good sense, has always worn the shape of fire. Flame gives light because it consumes. That is not a warning. It is not a cure. It is just what fire is. It has always been both. The same thing that illuminates is the same thing that burns, and there is no version of fire that does only one of those things. So the question you leave with is not a question about your past choices or your next ones. It is a question about what you are willing to hold, not what you are willing to survive, what you are willing to hold. The flame is still burning. You are standing near it. What do you see by its light?